And the whole story of James Bond and the image of James Bond is tied up with cars. You can't separate it. Ian Fleming himself was really interested in cars. He loved fast cars. And he always felt from the start that James Bond needed a kind of signature car.
The important elements of a good Bond film are attractive Bond ladies, you know, being driven around in fantastic cars, you know.
I think a James Bond car's got to be sleek, it's got to be lethal. It's definitely got to have some danger about it, and of course classy.
It's got to be a pedigree car with some background. It's got to be fast, have great performance. It's got to ultimately be classy. I think that's just about it, which is everything that Bond is.
It must reflect the character of the actor. So, of course, you've got Sean Connery that had an Aston Martin DB5. Perfect. It was a macho, heavy-powered car, looked quite aggressive. It perfectly suited Sean Connery's personality and character as James Bond. Then, of course, you have the Lotuses, which reflected Roger Moore's character, a much more gentle James Bond in many ways, witty and funny, and so that was reflected in the use of the Lotus Esprit series. And then you've gone now back, Daniel Craig goes back to the Aston Martin, back to this macho tough guy, and that's perfect.
The thing about Bond is he's an expert. He's the man we would all like to be. He knows how to do all these manly things, and he can get into any car and just drive it perfectly.
Cars in James Bond are really important, both in Ian Fleming's novels and in the movies as well, of course. And I guess they have their origins in Bond, in the creation of James Bond in like the very early 1950s, and the way that at that time Britain was a very cribbed and confined and depressing kind of place. You know, it was still very battered from the war. There was very little money. And cars were one of the ways in which people could dream about real luxury. And from the word go, Bond has wonderful cars.
I think, you know, the way the filmmakers make the films is very much in the spirit of Fleming, which is drive a big, powerful, sexy car. And that's, you know, that's what Bond does, and that's what the villains do. And it is about that kind of pornography of vehicles, be they motorbikes, cars, helicopters, aeroplanes.
In Goldfinger, as part of the script, they obviously thought up this idea, why not, you know, get a really expensive sports car, a British sports car, and put all these gadgets in. Well, that set the mould. After that, Bond was always going to have a car of some sort that was going to do some kind of fantastic stunt or chase or whatever. So it really all evolved from Goldfinger. And some of them worked reasonably well, others not so well.
By the time they did Goldfinger with the Aston Martin, the whole idea of James Bond and cars being special, that was really cemented by that film.
The Sunbeam Alpine, of course, is where it all begins. This is just like a rental car in Dr. No, the first of the Bond movies. And apparently it was simply a car, it was the only sporty-looking car that they could find on the island during shooting, and they just borrowed it from someone because it looked quite nice. And I think it's kind of has a nice kind of jaunty aspect to it, which is missing in the more kind of self-consciously serious and macho later cars that Bond drives.
The other week I went through all the Bond films, all the DVDs, and absolutely thoroughly enjoyed them, and of course started with Dr. No, where they feature the Sunbeam Alpine, and I thought, what a great looking car that is. I've never owned a Sunbeam Alpine, but I quite fancied going out and buying one and running it about after seeing that sequence again.
It's a lovely little sports car. It moves along at a fair old rate for the size engine it has. And yeah, in the 60s, and now, you know, with retro being in fashion, it's still a nice little car to drive about on a summer's day. Yeah, so it's a cool car.
The first cars came out in 1959, and the prototype was tested at Silverstone with the hard top on. And halfway round, because the car wasn't stiff enough, the hard top flew off. So if you look under the bonnet of all Alpines now, you'll find that there are two about inch diameter tubes from the front bulkhead to the front wing to stop the wing flexing.
Well, I like the Sunbeam Alpine because that was one of the ones that I remember as a kid I liked, and always see people driving around in them, and I always fancied myself as, having a go in one of those.
I think the Alpine, it would be a fine car if you were in the 60s in Jamaica, buzzing around those coastal roads, but it doesn't quite wash by today's standards. But when you watch the film, you just constantly see Sean kind of turning the wheel and diving from side to side, and it just looks so fake with the screen in the back.
Well, I think the Aston Martin DBS V12 in Casino Royale certainly followed on from the other Astons that have been used in previous Bonds. It was a very classy beast of a car.
It's quite nice in the Bond films that they keep him bang up to date, whereas in 1964 they used a DB5 and now they're using a DBS and the latest Aston Martins for the new films. And so with the introduction of Daniel Craig, he drove not only a DB5, because they've still kept the DB5 in the films, but using a DBS and in Casino Royale and then the subsequent films that Daniel Craig's doing, I'm sure they'll continue to use an Aston Martin, because his character is very much like a modern day Aston Martin, sort of a macho muscle car and a macho man's man.
Daniel Craig has the great advantage in terms of cars of looking like someone who probably himself does really like cars and responds to cars and enjoys driving them. And I think that Aston Martin in Casino Royale, he just looks completely at home behind the wheel. You kind of think the brand's fixed again.
Beautiful car, and it's the car I can probably see myself driving to work.
It is a fantastic moment in Casino Royale where he's just got into, it's the first time to properly drive fast this fantastic car, and you think, God, this is going to be great. And in about 10 seconds, he's just totaled it, which I think was the record number of times where they've managed to twist and spin a car.
The barrel roll in Casino Royale, where Bond swerves to miss the girl and the car flips and rolls across the ground, I recreated for a TV show called Fifth Gear here in the UK. And there's quite an interesting consideration because we didn't quite have a Bond budget, so we did it in a Ford Mondeo rather than an Aston Martin, which is not a stronger car, but the car has to have a roll cage in it, extensive roll cage. I was wearing a 6-point harness which holds me completely in place. I had a rally seat which kept my body straight and in place. I was wearing a head and neck restraint system, the same as the Formula One drivers wear, a helmet, a fireproof suit, extensive modifications to the car. The petrol tank was tiny, had only just under a gallon of fuel in it, and it's completely sealed, so there's no risk of an explosion. The battery is dry cell, so there's no risk of acid splash, and it's relocated. It's not in the front of the car. And there's a cannon fitted, filled with compressed nitrogen in the passenger seat. And this is a huge tube with a piston. And when I push the button, the piston's fired and the car literally flies into the air.
Even while I was watching that Aston doing those spins, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was an incredible stunt. And again, it was pulled off very believably within the context of the story. So that was, again, it was another first, and that's what Bond films are good at doing. They bring you something you've never seen before. And that's why they're still, bringing people in through the cinema doors to go and see them. And I hope they continue to do that forever and a day.
I visited the set of Casino Royale before they'd shot all the car stuff, and they were working on the Aston Martin. They had it there, before anyone had ever seen the car. and they were working on the modifications for it. So that was quite exciting.
I might have been a little bit disappointed in Casino Royale that they used the Aston Martin DBS so little and rolled it over. That was a bit of a shame, but I think they'll probably make amends for that in the next film. So I'm sure we'll see greater presence of Aston Martin in the next films.
It's exactly the sort of thing that Bond should be driving.
Ian Fleming originally came up with the idea of the Bentley 4.5 litre Bentley blower of the early 30s, which was the car that the great 1920s detective Bulldog Drummond had driven. And I think it was a nod to that because he'd enjoyed the Bulldog Drummond books, and it was one of the inspirations of James Bond.
Ian Fleming always saw Bond driving a Bentley, which he does in several of the books. And you can see the Bentley very briefly in, I think, the second Bond movie, From Russia with Love, but he doesn't drive it, he simply has sex with someone in it, but it's just a very brief scene.
The Bentley 4.5 litre with the Amherst Villiers supercharger that Fleming used to drive himself, and obviously he gave Bond in the early books in the 50s, was great in the 50s, but it doesn't work in today's world.
Fleming himself, although he loved cars and he loved driving cars, he didn't actually know very much about what went on under the bonnet, and as with a lot of his other things, he simply spoke to people who did know a lot. And in fact, the guy that ran Pan Books was a huge car enthusiast, and he gave him a lot of notes, which Fleming literally just sort of copied down into his books. I mean, particularly when he was customising his new Bentley, he got some advice from the guy at Pan, and he got some advice from an engineer at Rolls-Royce as well.
The Bentley never really gets a look in on as a serious Bond car in the movies, but I mean the books are unimaginable without it, because Bond's always souping it up in one way or another. Each of the novels he adds an extra feature to it, an extra thing to the engine or some clever little extra, and he has this. The only gadget is a revolver he keeps in the glove compartment.
He loved putting in technical information and telling us about things, and men reading thrillers particularly, they like to learn things. They think they're finding something out, and so I tried to do the same thing for kids in Silverfin, my first book, where Bond is taught to drive by an uncle in the field behind his house, and the uncle tells him how a car works, and I simply tried to get that down into the book as a nod to Fleming, and in that book Bond learns to drive on what was a Bamford and Martin, which was pre-Aston Martin, a sort of 1920s sports car, I suppose.
I suspect that today James Bond could possibly drive a Bentley. They are producing more sporty type Bentleys, and one never knows. In the future, Bentley might figure as James Bond's car.
Ian Fleming's choice of a Bentley was beautiful, written sort of in the early days when that was one of the most high performance cars around at the time, I guess. Very, very difficult to do any form of stunt in a big car like that. They don't move very well. They're designed to be driven in a nice straight line and be comfortable. So not probably the best car for stunts, but certainly a very classy car.
I think if the old-fashioned Bentley 4 litre were to show up in a modern Bond, he would probably be chasing a baddie in a Ferrari in it, and he'd still manage to keep up.
Maybe the baddie might drive a Bentley in the future films.
Bond needs to be contemporary. He's a man of today, not a man of yesterday. The Aston Martin Vantage that was driven by Timothy Dalton as James Bond in The Living Daylights, that's a lovely looking car. I think that's one of the best designed of all the modern Aston Martin cars. More attractive certainly than the Aston that was in Die Another Day. There's a sleekness to it. It's a big, heavy car, I've driven one, and it handles. I think it handles beautifully, and it goes like they all do, very fast.
That was a really nice step forward, a slightly more modern car, but still had everything. A quintessentially English gents sort of sporting racing car. It's a gorgeous car. And I thought that was perfect for Bond. It was a nice step on from the DB5. Perfect. It really fitted the mould.
Not a big fan of the Astons from the Timothy Dalton era. I find them quite blunt. They all blur into each other.
That particular car, where the skis, it was like the DB5, the V8. It had lots of gadgets. It had skis that come out. It had a rocket booster at the back. It had rockets at the front. So it was also fitted with studded tyres to grip the ice, and so it had a great deal of gadgetry as well on the car.
BMW 750iL in Tomorrow Never Dies, they're attractive enough looking cars, I suppose, if you're a rep, but they're not Bond. They're not meant for Bond, and they should never have been in a Bond movie. It was just exaggerated product placement.
I think my most disappointing Bond cars would have to be the BMWs, because it was just a corporate sellout, really, I think, and it really made the point that these kind of brands can infiltrate classic kind of films that you've known and loved since being a kid.
It's not a spy car, it's just a normal Retmobile.
It's a bit of a daddy's car.
Emphasised so much on the gadgetry, showing the manufacturers' logos, than actually performing the stunts and doing the actual chase scenes themselves.
I have no problem with the introduction of a new type of car, other than Aston Martin or Lotus, as with the BMWs, of course, that were introduced with the Pierce Brosnan films, because the producers have to have an added input from manufacturers that are willing to put a bit of marketing budget into the equation, and so it helps in the development and the rest of the film. But it's nice to see Aston Martin back, I must admit. But it was quite nice to see the BMWs involved as well in the other films.
I think my favourite James Bond car, although many people don't like it, was the BMW, the one that he could control by remote control in the multi-storey car park.
It's got a big engine, fast 0 to 60 speed, good handling, and it's got a BMW badge on it.
It was nice to see the Z3 for the first time in a Bond film. It'd be quite fun to have a remote control car, wouldn't it?
It seemed like a bit of a nod to computer games at the time, where most people watching the film, their experience of driving a car like that would have been on a computer game. And he manages to combine both from the back of his car, completely impractical. It's one of those things you think, yeah, wouldn't it be great to do that? But you think, no, you couldn't really drive a car lying down on the back seat on a little tiny screen like that.
I thought the BMW 7 Series in Tomorrow Never Dies are really nice cars. A bit of an unusual choice, I thought, for Bond, because they're a little bit understated. Bond doesn't normally do understated, but great cars, and certainly the remote control driving sequence was an extraordinary bit of car work, an extraordinary bit of stunt driving as well, with the driver's seat actually behind the passenger seat in the back of the car, completely being driven by remote control by the stunt drivers.
I think the Aston Martin V12 that Pierce Brosnan's Bond drives in Die Another Day, the whole idea that it's invisible is pretty silly.
Women apparently are turned on by the noise of a car. They can actually prove this. They tried it with a Volkswagen Polo, it did nothing, but when they got some big, deep-throated car, it apparently raised the hormone levels in women. So maybe Fleming was onto something there, that Bond drives these big cars, but it's only when he's trying to be this kind of flashy young man that he drives the Aston Martin.
It always surprises me how fast it is as well. It's an amazingly powerful car, and every time I get in it, I scare myself. You know, sort of used to driving a Jag, or what I normally drive around is although I drive a Caterham, which is a fast car. You know, getting into the Vanquish, it's amazing, that V12 engine.
The only time I felt that Bond has really just gone ridiculous, and that's even including all the Roger Moore films, would be when his Aston went invisible. I mean, come on. That's just crazy.
People thought that was a bit, you know, taking things too far, but in actual fact the technology is out there, and you've got to admire the Bond producers for keeping everything bang up to date, and when there's something new out there they want to incorporate it, and that's great. I saw the film again the other day from having seen it originally, and I thought that sequence was quite good. I quite enjoyed that.
I thought that was a bit ridiculous. It was too far from reality.
It was the one which came in on the ice, and I remember it breaking through a glass wall. And it was just an awesome scene, awesome setting, superb car.
The Aston Martin Vanquish that they used on Die Another Day, I thought was a really nice and innovative use of a car on a Bond stunt. I like that the cars were four-wheel drive. They had spikes to stick in the ice, and the whole masking mirror thing where the car became invisible, I thought was a really good take on a Bond gadget.
The military are using that invisible cloak device now to great effect, and I'm sure it won't be too long before we see it functioning as well as we did on a Bond film.
I thought the ice chase with the Aston Martin Vanquish and the Jaguar XKR was a good stunt. It was really well choreographed, and great use of in-car torpedoes / rockets / mines, whatever, you know, mortars. You know, it was good. I mean, I don't know how many cars they trashed in the filming of that. I think quite a few. But the fact of the matter is that the Jaguar XKR and the Aston Martin were pretty much exactly the same car, you know, just down to the chassis.
For the ice chase sequences, they had Vanquish bodies fitted to Ford Explorers. They were four-wheel drive and were able to grip the ice a lot better. But also, they were able to fit then the mechanism for the machine guns within the body of the car, which you couldn't do on a normal Vanquish because it has the V12 engine stuffed in there, so there was no room to have machine guns come in and out. So the Ford Explorer-based Vanquishes were used for that, where the machine guns were able to come in and out because they had a smaller engine.
I think For Your Eyes Only really put the Citroën de Chauffeur on the map. They even came out with a limited edition Bond version with these little bullet hole stickers on. I mean, full-size car. I mean, it was, you know, you were living the dream, weren't you, driving that?
There was a great sequence in For Your Eyes Only, of course, not with the Lotuses, but with a 2CV, which was brilliant. And that was done by a friend of mine, the stuntman, Remy Julian.
The little yellow devil that's featured in For Your Eyes Only, which again isn't really a James Bond car because it belongs to Melina Havelock, the girl that Bond is shadowing. But you know, it gets him out of a tight spot.
I suppose there's something of a Jason Bourne moment where Roger Moore gets to drive the 2CV in For Your Eyes Only, because Jason Bourne doesn't drive the latest, most expensive, flashy cars. He just gets in what he can get his hands on, like a taxi or whatever. And that's pretty well what Roger Moore does in that. And because he's James Bond, he beats everyone else, even though he's in a yellow 2CV.
It's not what you would call the typical James Bond car, but it does very well, as I remember in the car chase. It takes a lot of takes quite a few hits So, and it stands up quite well.
A really difficult car to do stunts in because it's got really, really skinny tyres. It's a really flexible car to drive. It's bendy and it's flexible, and it hasn't got a lot of anti-roll bar protection, so it rolls about all over the place. So a really tough vehicle to do anything in without flipping it over or breaking it.
The choreography of the chase sequence in For Your Eyes Only with the Citroen is very well put together. It's very cleverly done, but it's too humorous for my personal taste. I like my Bond films to be more serious.
The beauty of Bond is that he can turn his hand to anything, and he can make anything do what he wants, including a Citroen de Chauffeur. I don't know if anyone's ever tried to land that in a tree, but I'm guessing it's not that easy.
In The Man with the Golden Gun, they used a couple of AMC cars. So Scaramanga drove a Matador, and of course that's the flying car in The Man with the Golden Gun. But they also used another AMC, and that was the one that did the spiral jump.
The AMC Hornet that does the 360-degree roll, which is fantastic, and I understand it was done perfectly first time as well. It's a car that's basically there to do the stunt. It's not a car that Bond would normally drive, and obviously within the story, obviously he drives it out through the showroom window because he needs a vehicle to do this stunt with, you know, so it's there for that purpose, really. So it doesn't really count as a James Bond car, I don't think.
It does kind of remind you of the way that actually some of those earlier Bond films, with their much clunkier cars, sort of like the merits of much more American designed kind of big bird kind of cars with lots and lots of metal and chrome and so on.
As far as the Hornet's concerned, I really don't have a huge view on that car. I mean, one of the greatest stunts ever.
It drives up a crooked bridge, rolls through a complete 360 degrees and lands on the other bridge on the other side of a river. Absolutely fantastic.
It had a feel of sort of a Cannonball Run about it. It had a real country redneck sheriff. And I remember a great scene when the car took off over a river and flipped.
The mathematics behind it was pretty impressive, so yeah, it's got to be a winner.
It's got a bit of everything. You need precision, you need a lot of preparation, a lot of practice, and you've got to be absolutely on the ball and concentrate when you're doing it to take off at exactly the right speed, not dip the accelerator, not accelerate more, keep the car absolutely stable on takeoff.
I remember seeing it at the time thinking, car can't actually do that. Surely that wasn't for real. I mean, it was done for real, but you know, it was spoilt with a kind of comedy sound effect and some daft music. Whereas you know, you could have done it as quite a gritty and exciting moment rather than just a kind of circus stunt.
They did that in one take. The stuntman did that in one take, and of course, Cubby Broccoli was so pleased. He gave the stuntman an amazing bonus because he was so pleased that it didn't take more than one take. And even though they've tried to replicate that particular sequence recently, you know, it's a very difficult stunt to do.
That stunt that was done in 1974, I believe, cost something like $1 million. The whole thing was planned by a computer-generated model, and they did it in one take. To the best of my knowledge, that's never been done since then.
It's just spectacular and ridiculous and Bond, and I love it.
The Underwater Lotus Esprit was very popular, and that's one of the kind of key Bond moments.
I grew up in the years of Roger being the man, and you know, I've got to say this: the Spy Who Loved Me Esprit converting into a sub chase scene has got to, you know, it stands out. It really does.
I think the Lotus cars that were used in The Spy Who Loved Me and For Your Eyes Only were very much of that, Roger Moore era. They were nice enough cars, I suppose, but they just didn't do it for me.
Very sleek-looking car, which winds up also turning into a submarine, slightly absurdly. Now, of course, that seems like a monument to the period when it came out. It has a wonderful, absurd 1970s design air to it, which couldn't pass muster earlier or later. It was like a temporary solution to making cars look sporty.
It was way ahead of its time in terms of design. It looked like it's moving when it's standing still. It's like a dart. It was classy, it was sexy, it was fast. It wasn't an actually very reliable car and notoriously had problems with the engine and the cooling system. But it just had everything in one package in terms of its image that was perfect for a Bond car.
This particular car goes into the water and transforms into a submarine. Absolutely amazing. Nobody had ever seen anything quite like that. And I think the look, even now, today, that S1 Esprit is a great-looking car. I think it was a fantastic choice of a vehicle for a Bond film in Spy Who Loved Me.
Rog dives in with the Lotus, and you think, oh my God, all is lost. And he's as calm and suave as you like.
And I think at some point he produces fin-like things that help to sort of swim underwater, and it turns up on a beach somewhere, some exotic beach somewhere, which sort of astounds everybody sunbathing.
It's like the most awesome scene when basically he just cruises into the water and it just turns into a submarine. As a kid, it's just mind-blowing, brilliant. And then when he drives out afterwards,
My favourite bit of that film is when he drives back out, having dispatched the baddies, he drives out of the water onto a beach full of tourists, unwinds the window, sticks his hand out and drops a fish. Just tremendous.
I've never quite worked out how that fish gets in the car. He drives out on the beach, he's completely dry, but he's managed to get a fish in the car.
They had several shells that were made to do different things. For example, transform the wheels, then transformed into the fins, and then a couple that actually went underwater. Divers went underwater. So there were a couple of. I think there are 3 shells known to exist that were actually used. I have one, the Ian Fleming Foundation, and there's one in New York, I think, one of the submarines there.
The quintessential James Bond vehicle must be the Aston Martin in Goldfinger. I think that's when everyone thinks about James Bond cars, that's what they think about in the end.
My favourite Bond car has to be the Aston Martin DB5.
The DB5, the Aston Martin.
The Aston Martin DB5.
Has to be the DB5. Original is the best.
My favorite Bond car is Aston Martin DB5.
It was one of the first, and it was full of gadgets.
It's just a gorgeous looking car. It represents Bond.
It's the first car of James Bond. Is the most beautiful car.
It's those sleek lines, the elegance, the Britishness.
It's got more gadgets than your average gadget shop.
The one gadget that everybody remembers from the DB5 is the ejector seat.
And just being able to sort of press my cigarette lighter and shoot 30 foot up into the air and sort of land somewhere on a hill with a parachute coming out of my back.
The ejector seat, in case the missus is nagging too much, just bunk, get rid of her.
Any car that can basically do this.
It just, for me, it sums up Bond, that car.
Aston Martin è bellissimo.
The original car was really penned by Ken Adam, who was the most fantastic genius, really. He had the idea of converting the DB5, and he did the original drawings, gave them to Aston Martin, and some of the special effects people from Eon were involved in it as well, the project. But he's really the man, and if I have to have a hero other than somebody like Cubby Broccoli, then Ken Adam was a fantastic designer and a person with great imagination.
In its own right, it was classic. It didn't need a Bond film to make it famous, it was just good. The other cars, I think, perhaps were made more famous because of the Bond films.
When I saw Goldfinger in '64, I was only a wee lad, and it really had an effect because it was such a beautiful looking sports car, but to have all those gadgets on it, you know, it was as cool as anything ever could be.
Goldfinger was one of the first films that I ever saw as a boy, and the DB5 in that just captured my imagination. I had one of the little corgi toys, of course, and as did everybody, and so that was the car that did it for me, really. It was something special. The gadgets were amazing, and I'd never seen anything like them before.
It's interesting that in the book of Goldfinger, which is where Bond first drives the Aston Martin, he drives it because he wants to give the impression that he is a flashy young man about town, because he's impersonating someone else in order to get close to Goldfinger. So he's making a deliberate statement by driving that car, and he's implying that it's not a car that James Bond would normally drive.
At the opening of Goldeneye, Bond is in the Aston Martin DB5 and he's showing off to this psychologist, and he just spins the car, stops it, she's all panicking, and he presses a button, and a champagne box flips open, and there it is on ice, ready for seduction.
The ejector seat, the machine guns, you know, the smoke screen, the bulletproof shield at the back. I mean, what more could you want in a car? You know, it's fantastic for escaping from traffic wardens and anybody else.
To see that man fly out of the roof, I mean, one couldn't believe that at the time. And in fact, that was the thing I must have done thousands and thousands of times as a boy, press the side of the corgi Aston Martin, have the little man shoot out. So really, that's got to be my favourite gadget on any of the Bond films. It was an inspired sort of thing to do at the particular time.
What devilish mind dreamt that up? Fantastic. You flick the top off of the gear lever, push a button, and the sunroof flips open, and the passenger gets fired up into the air. Just superb.
When GoldenEye came out and Pierce Brosnan was the James Bond, and there'd been a little bit of a gap between Bond films, when that came out, that was fantastic for me. And where the DB5 races with the Ferrari, I think it's a super Bond chase sequence. And after I saw that film, I thought, I've got to have one of those. I've got to have one of those Aston Martins out of that. And I did everything possible to get one.
In the book, where Bond goes to the MI6 carpool to choose which car he's going to drive on the continent, and he's got a choice between the Jaguar and the Aston Martin, and he decides because he wants to be this flashy young man, he'll go for the Aston Martin. And, you know, think how Jaguar's fortunes might have fared if Bond had gone for the Jaguar and that had been the car that we associate with Bond.
Goldfinger still holds up for me because that chase around Auric Goldfinger's factory, which obviously was the buildings around Pinewood Studios, has a certain speed and urgency to it, and you obviously want him to escape, and it's one of those times he doesn't, and lands himself up on the laser table, which is quite a nice twist.
It's just a wonderful ballet of camera angles on the car, and it's shown at every angle in different lighting, at different speeds, and all you're aware of is this wonderful silver object zooming across the screen. And that's, I think, a fabulous car chase, and oddly one where it ends with the car crashing and Bond being captured, which is also a refreshing change.
The Aston Martin DB5 from Goldfinger was so popular that they immediately brought it back for the pre-credit sequence in Thunderball, with some even more additions. This time it can squirt water out the back and confound following cars, which is great. And you think, wow, wouldn't it be great to have a car that does that? But apparently they had to have this huge, great water tanker next to the car with these huge pressure hoses, because the amount of water it squirted out was, you know, what you could actually fit in the boot would have squirted out for about 1 second. So it's not a practical device to have a car that squirts that amount of water.
Undoubtedly, the Aston Martin DB5 is the most famous car in the world. James Bond's Aston Martin, that is. And I think most people, it would be top 10 of anybody's lists of not only James Bond cars, but if you took any film or TV car, or almost if you took any car, it would be top of the list, really.
There's something about that movie is such a wonderful movie and such a enjoyable experience and such wonderful music, and all the actors are really great, and the script's really brilliant. And in that context, that car is just like should be one of the lead actors, really. It should get a credit alongside Sean Connery. It should say, you know, Sean Connery, Gert Frober, Aston Martin.
The films, to stay popular, they have to keep moving forward and modernising Bond, because in Fleming's books, it was very much about these are the new exciting things in the world. These are the great exciting cars to drive. You know, Fleming was really fascinated in new things and gadgets, and he tried to get as much of that into his books. So in order to keep the spirit of that, you know, certainly for the films, you can't go back and keep set. Well, none of the films have been set in the 1950s as the books were. So you have to have the newest, most desirable cars in the films, no matter how unlikely that might be.
It is true that the Aston Martin from the early movies does remain the Bond car. I mean, even the later Aston Martins that are brought in and the later ones just aren't as convincing. And I think it just happens to mark a particular point of style in Britain in the sort of very early 60s, where for the last time, possibly, Britain was a really genuinely stylish place. And you can see in the movies the way that Sean Connery is dressed is as good as the way that the cars are designed. And just as he can get away with wearing a lovely kind of narrow woolen black tie and a really nicely tailored suit. And so the car matches that in a really elegant kind of British way. But car chases are really important, and the kind of car is really important, and having a really posh car is really important. Particularly the kind of cars made in such tiny quantities that most of the readers couldn't dream of having them. They had to be genuinely luxurious.
Fleming's writing of cars and car chases still stands up very well today, and I think that was an influence on the filmmakers.
I think the Bond cars of the future are going to follow along the way that they are now. They're going to be very high-end. I don't think they'll ever be concept cars or futuristic cars, because Bond needs to some degree to blend in. So he can't have a car like a Batman car that looks really unusual. So it'll be one of the really high-end luxury cars, a Lamborghini, a new range of Aston Martin, something like that, a Ferrari perhaps.
It still needs to be a traditional motor. You know, you get in there, it's got a steering wheel and some foot pedals, and woof, you know, off it goes. It still should be, there should still be an element of skill, you know, for the driver. And obviously Bond's a great driver, and you can't expect to see a decent car chase if some kind of robot's going to be driving the car. It needs to be Bond.
I mean, it'd be interesting to see if he ever gets round to driving any of the new Bentleys, as there was such a part of the books. And now that Bentley is getting a slightly younger, hipper image, it might just happen.
I think the Bond cars of the future have got a hell of a lot to live up to, because basically they've gone underwater and they've gone in the air. I think basically it would have to go into space.
One of the reasons why people like me become writers is that through our books we can live quite vicariously. And, you know, I have lived through James Bond through writing about him.
I look forward to whatever they can dream up, because they are so brilliant at dreaming up great things for the future, or new developments that might take place. They'll keep it bang up to date, I'm sure.